Welcome to the Shadow Warrior podcast. I'm the host, Rajeev Srinivasan, a columnist and a professor of innovation and strategy in India. Today, I'm delighted to have with me Professor Narayanan Komerath. He is a retired professor of aeronautical engineering and very much involved in defense and national security issues and so on. Especially, he was a well-known member of the Bharat Rakshak Forum for years, and it's a pleasure for me to have Narayan on the program. Narayan, welcome after a break of about a year or so. So let's go for it. We're going to talk about Adani.
So Rajiv, I read your article about the attack on the Adani group of companies, and thanks for the opportunity to discuss some points with you. First, I must say that I find it curious to see Indian media experts starting out with a disclaimer that they have not and never have had any Adani stock. I mean, isn't that like in America, somebody who owns no shares of Amazon, Microsoft, General Electric, etc., Tesla, claiming stock expertise? Sort of the criterion to pick the O.J. Simpson jury, if you remember that from many years ago. So I must say that I probably own Adani stock. I know I own Adani stock, and hundreds of others through mutual funds and other things. So if that makes me biased, certainly I'm biased. Okay.
Yeah,
that's.
See, I think it's virtue signaling, Narayan, because they seem to believe that by saying they do not have any shares of the Adani group, that it frees them from some, I don't know, original sin. It's just silly. It's silly posturing, in my opinion. And the fact is, let me be clear, just like you, I also have a small amount of Adani stock. I've been investing steadily in Adani ports in small amounts. But that doesn't make me particularly blind to the problems of the Adani group, just like, owning Apple stock doesn't make you blind. So it's one of those typical things in the Indian media where people, put on airs and virtue signal. So I think I just ignore that. But the thing that's interesting, in my opinion, is that after all this fuss and everybody is running around like a headless chicken saying the sky is falling or whatever, not that much has happened. I predicted this when I wrote my article on January 30th that, I don't think much is going to happen because Adani, unlike some other big scandals that I could name, had some real assets, ports, airports, mining concessions. Now, these are important in any case, but especially when a country like India is going into infrastructure in a big way. These things, real hard assets do mean something. So I think, in some sense, there's been much ado about nothing, although we can, look at what's behind it. I think what's potentially interesting is not what has happened, but why it has happened.
So that's when I saw this attack, instantly, I had this sense of deja vu. It was like 20 saal baad. Many people today will have forgotten. It's exactly the same modus operandi or MO that was used on November 22nd, 2002, in a vicious choreographed attack on the IDRF, the India Development and Relief Fund. IDRF was, and it is thriving today, by the way, a successful and trusted Indian American charity which had proved its excellence after the Orissa super cyclone killed 100,000 plus people, the Kargil war, and the horrible Bhuj earthquake of 2001. On that day, a report resulting from 5 years of comprehensive research. See, that's exactly what they said about this Hindenburg report, 2 years in this case, by 7 US-based academic faculty experts. That makes them, that's absolute credibility. They claimed that orphanages, leprosy patient shelters, even a medical center affiliated with the Presbyterian Church of North America were all just fronts for the Hindu nationalist government of India, purely to fund genocide against minorities. Okay, just think about that. And this was immediately parroted by all the usual suspects, Outlook magazine, the Hindu, the Times of India, and all their Marxist and Pakistani and US-based cohorts, probably Washington Post, New York Times, I don't remember. Now that gem of academic depth was sponsored, if I recall correctly, by the Sabrang NGO run by Tista Setalwad and Javed somebody, the charity, quote unquote charity, approved by the government of India of that time, run out of a mansion at Juhu Beach, Mumbai. I know must be a terrible slum out there, as I heard. Did you notice that similarity too?
Well, yeah. Now that you mention it, I do remember your sort of yeoman service and defense of IDRF all those years ago. And what I recall most distinctly is that most of these NGOs, anybody in that business, I call them lords of poverty. There was a famous book about the IMF and World Bank and so forth being, lords of poverty. So the same thing. Most of these NGOs are sort of mechanisms for diverting money to individuals, or basically to individuals. Because I believe that most of them have such high administrative costs that if you give 100 rupees, only about 10 rupees gets to the actual, the recipient, target recipient. And we've seen this in spades recently. There was this fellow Saket Gokhale, right? There was this Rana Ayub, and of course Tista Setalwad herself, were all accused of siphoning money meant for disaster relief or refugees or whatever to their own personal accounts. So there is a thriving industry here which you have to pay attention to. So there are people who are motivated bad actors who use opportunities of any kind, regardless of what it does to the country's reputation or the economy's growth or whatever, so long as they're able to divert some money to themselves. Now, the thing about IDRF is that it is incredibly, and you know this better than I do, it's incredibly efficient. If I'm not mistaken, 99% of the money that they get, so out of 100 rupees, 99 rupees actually ends up in the hands of the intended recipients. Now that's fantastic. I mean, they should be given, I don't know, a Nobel Prize or something. But naturally, they're cutting into the profits of these charlatans, because they're used to buying first-class air tickets, staying in five-star hotels, and generally having a good time. And in Tista Setalwad's case, her accusation, now this is funny, she apparently diverted money to buying sanitary napkins and fine wine. And that case has been in abeyance in the Supreme Court for at least 10 years. So you can see that if you are a certain kind of person, part of the con market gang, you can do various things and you get away with it. So I think that's a sort of nexus that we saw there. And I'm pretty sure that the same kind of thing is happening in this instance as well against Adani, because the same or similar sort of entrepreneurs are there, right? Who would benefit personally. So that's what I think that's coming from. That's no wonder it reminds you of IDR. It's the same kind of attack.
So back then, the reason I remember that date so well is that I was so terrified when I saw that report. I mean, when I heard about the report, I said, oh my goodness, that is the time that the FBI was going after AK-47 charities in the United States. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm going to jail. So I said, hey, I got a copy of the report and I spent 30 minutes, the most intense 30 minutes I've spent reading through the whole thing. And then I burst out laughing. So this time I didn't do anything of that sort. I just got a copy of the report. I tried to read it. Sure enough, same thing. Bunch of so-called statistics downloaded from the Adani website. Yes, Adani Group shares are run up over the past year, well ahead of the average price to earnings ratio, which I find comfortable. But so have Tesla or Google or Amazon. So what? As the old story goes, if I had bought Microsoft when it was $5 40 years ago and held on, well, But the report also said, here's where it gets very interesting. They said that mutual fund managers had not bought Adani stock. So that's kind of a red flag, isn't it? This turned out to be quite false. Index funds actually hold Adani stock exactly in proportion to the index that they match. What else do you expect? Other mutual funds are on average overweighted on Adani. So this is part of the MO. They just tell things that are not true. Report seemed empty of any other new fact, just full of hype and rants and abuse with big words. So uncannily similar to that Sabrang report in sheer low class. So I want to tell you, that's when I went out and tripled my holdings of Adani shares.
Good for you, good for you. I didn't do that, but I just kept, buying my small numbers through a systematic investment plan. But yeah, you're right. If you look at the information out there that these guys allegedly, did research, as you said, for 2 years, there's nothing to it because companies talk up their stock, okay, and it is, there's even there's even the idea of pump and dump, right? Because people everywhere, and I remember this is absolutely the norm in Silicon Valley. You have these companies with extraordinarily high valuations, and then they use their stock to buy other companies, okay, using their inflated stock. So this is something that's absolutely, run of the mill, and there's nothing much. If this is the biggest thing they can accuse Adani of, then I'm like, they're absolutely on the money. There's nothing illegal about it, or even immoral. Okay, you are interested in increasing the value of your stock, so you do whatever marketing you can do to get it up there. It is true that the price earnings ratios were astronomical. I mean, I used to be a little bit nervous about that as well. But yeah, I mean, this is the way markets work. If you're pumped up, then that balloon of yours is going to be pricked. And okay, that's nothing to do with the Chinese balloons, but this happens. Okay, if you're too highly valued, somebody's going to prick your balloon, and then you're going to be falling down. That's just sort of normal in the way the stock market works. There's nothing magical, or there's nothing that the government is doing, as these guys were alleging. It just happens that way. I mean, incidentally, I don't know if you noticed this. Alphabet stock fell $100 billion in one day. It did because their new chatbot, Bard, apparently made it made a mistake, right? And it was a stupid mistake, which actually tells me that the chat GPT and generative AI hype is just nonsense, right? Not that it's particularly Google's fault. But my question is, why didn't you all jump on that and say, oh, Google did something? They didn't do that. And same thing, these guys, they sat there and watched FTX, which is the total, epitome of vaporware, lose $40 billion and didn't do anything about it. Why didn't they investigate FTX? So I think, there are a number of sort of incidental and anecdotal things in the background that suggest that this is not in good faith.
Which brings me to the next question. See, in the immediate aftermath of that report's loud release, I looked at what was happening there. Fewer than 2% of Adani stock actually changed hands, as far as I can make out. Did I read that data right? Now, since these are listed companies, as I hear, Adani insiders must own less than 75% of the shares. So that means at least 23%, maybe far more, is held by outsiders who just stayed off the market. It's the speculators with the 2% who lost money. But how was this represented in the media? $100 billion collapse. That's not $100 billion. As far as I can calculate, it's less than $1 billion. And only those who sold lost any money.
Yeah, you bring up a very interesting point in this whole mayhem. Who lost money? And as you said, the significant amount of the shares are held by insiders. So there's not that much floating around in the market. And the big investors who are on the institutional side, like LIC and SBI and so forth, they got in early. So whatever losses they have experienced now are paper losses compared to their paper profits which even if they invested in tranches earlier, they would have made a huge amount of paper profit. So they didn't lose money. And as you said, there aren't that many retail investors out there. There's only a small number of retail investors who may have taken a bit of a hit. So that only leaves the speculators, the traders, who would have been left holding the bag. So that's why I'm also a little bit surprised that the stock market, the depreciation in the price, I don't think it's a catastrophic thing. And it's also been, a little bit of an up and down after that. It has clawed back some of the losses. So that's why I was saying up front that it's not clear that much happened. It's exaggerated, right? And well, the other thing, yeah, I agree that the PE was high. If the average PE of stocks in the market here, I don't know, maybe 20, something like that, this maybe was 100, right? So that's high. But on the other hand, people value companies not necessarily based on today's cash flow. They're looking at how successful Adani has been in project implementation. Let me mention one more thing. See, most countries have a soft spot for those companies they see as national champions. Example, Boeing. Did you notice how, Joe Biden was ecstatic when Air India bought $45 billion worth of planes from Boeing? Well, Boeing is not a government company. It's a private company. So why is Biden getting so excited? Well, this is a national champion. And there were other national champions like this in the past, like the Andrew Carnegie's and Rockefeller, John D. Rockefellers and so forth. So if there are people who can execute projects of importance to the country, right? The country has a soft corner for them. There's nothing particularly astonishing about that. So yeah, so going back to this this question of who lost, I'm also of the opinion, as you said, that it's not like a catastrophic loss for investors in the marketplace, which also explains why the market has come back. It's once again the broad market, the Nifty indices, the Nifty 50, etc. They're touching, they're on the way to touch previous highs. This seems to have sort of brushed off this whole Adani thing.
I did find out that the Indian market is actually quite thin or shallow or whatever the term is, because you suddenly hit bottom. There's nobody out there. It's not like there are, because I tried to buy, I did buy it, one of the Adani companies, and the trader called back and said, there's nobody buying, only sellers. There's only, you sure you want to buy this? I said, yes, go ahead and buy it. And I'm not sorry about it. It's doing all right. But it's very, very thin. Now, I noticed that Adani was able to talk about big money. Adani was able to complete funding his FPO public offering, but then he turned around and returned all that money to those who paid it, saying that they could buy lower and make even more money. Seems like he won immense goodwill, if nothing else. And he basically pulled the mat from under the predators. What do you think about that?
Yeah, at the very least, it was excellent PR, because it gives them the reputation of looking after their investors. So that's one. I mean, it looks good. And let me tell you, a lot of things that happen in the market is positioning and narrative building and so forth. So that's one. So they came out looking like, I don't know, smelling, as the Americans say, smelling of roses or something, right? They came out looking good on the one hand. The second I should tell you is that if you look at the investors who invested in the FPO, the retail investor was not present because it was just the day after the Hindenburg report, or 2 days after. But big Indian billionaires, Sajjan Jindal and so on, several others I could name, they invested a lot. And I believe the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, these are all people, they're not stupid, right? They're not emotion prone. They know what they're doing. So when they invest, it is also, it behooves Adani to take care of them, right? You want them not just for this one incident, you want them for the long term. And if I believe that the Abu Dhabi Wealth Fund had been investing in Adani for years, right? So you want to make sure that your good investors are not unhappy with you. So I think it was it sounded odd at the time that he pulled back the FPO, but I think it was actually a very good move by Adani to do that.
But now it seems that all those the report sponsors are getting a bit desperate. Mr. George Soros read out a statement that frankly seemed like it was written for him before the report came out. Because it sounded like somebody reading news from a week ago. Okay. I've not paid attention to George Soros, but I hear he's like Mother Teresa to the pro-democracy movements, or Professor Moriarty or Ernst Stavro Blofeld of the deep state, depending on your point of view. He certainly has, in the words of Winston Churchill, opened his mouth and removed all doubt. By calling for the revival of democracy in India. It seems that Soros is predicting doom for the Adani group of companies, but by extension for the government and the nation of India. That's alarming.
It's alarming, but then let's be honest. Soros has been doing this for some time. A few years ago, he explicitly said he had $1 billion fund set aside for overthrowing enemies of democracy. Example, Narendra Modi. Okay, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us that he's reiterating what he said then. And Soros is an interesting person in general because, you may recall that he made his first billion by shorting the British pound in 1982 or something. One day he made $1 billion. So he's been out there, attacking countries. After that he attacked the Thai baht and then the Japanese yen and the Malaysian ringgit, whatever. He didn't do so well. Okay, maybe because they were better protected or whatever. But anyway, so he has been doing this kind of attack on sovereign countries and their currencies and their economic prospects for some time. Sandeepan Dey, who wrote at Money Control about Soros, he said that this might be Soros's biggest gamble, bigger than the British gamble, because he sees that India is really a very well functioning, or at least its economy is growing very well. So he could possibly make a lot of money shorting this. Now, I've been reading about Soros, and in his interviews, he is explicit that he is amoral. That is, he doesn't care about what happens in the ruin and mayhem that he leaves behind him, what happens to the people that he ruins, etc. He's only worried about money. So he's been explicit about that. So he has this tendency, to rape and pillage. And the timing of this Hindenburg report suggests that it was aimed not only at Adani, but also at the Indian economy, because it came out like a couple of days before the budget, which incidentally was received very well by media and analysts and so forth. And the Indian government has shown remarkable perspicaciousness in the last few years in kind of navigating through the shoals of COVID-related problems. But anyway, so I think what he was trying to do, and he is continuing to do this, is essentially make money by ruining India. And that's up, that's fine. We can accept that that's what he's doing. And it's good of him to explicitly reiterate that, as you said, by reading out from a prepared speech. Now, I had the speculation that he is actually not an actor by himself, that he is allied with certain shadowy organizations that I dare not mention, but they may be using him as a front for plausible deniability, right? I mean, if Soros goes around doing this, yeah, everybody knows Soros is a bad guy or whatever, but they may be feeding him either cash or information, which he is then using to do this attack on different countries. And now India is definitely in his gun sights, and I don't think it has anything to do with Modi even. It's just that he sees that India is vulnerable to an attack by him. And when you mention many of these NGOs that are and academics who are part of this attack, I'm pretty sure that there is some money flow. If somebody were to follow, there's an entity called Disinfo Lab, which I don't know if you've come across. They put out these, really brilliant graphics that show the connections between various entities. So there was one they just put out a couple of days ago showing Soros in the middle of this sort of spider web and all these tentacles. I don't know if I'm mixing metaphors, but all these entities that are related to him that are active. So, I think you cannot rule out Soros's capacity. He's good at what he does. You cannot also rule out the other, entities behind him that are involved and interested in regime change. But I think, keeping that in mind, this is something India has to deal with, and India will deal with it.
So yeah, I have no idea how things will turn out. But as you said, I do believe that Adani ports work every day. I think when I moved, my container came through there. So do Adani cement factories, power plants, infrastructure projects. These are real work, real assets, real business, not vaporware as far as I can tell. And I have no proof that Adani companies have not committed some punishable crime somewhere. On the other hand, I have even less proof that Mr. Soros and whoever, Mr. Hindenburg or whoever behind are not mass murderers.
Yeah, that's true. There are beliefs. You probably don't have proof about many of these things. But see, the thing about Adani, and you put your finger on it. Adani is not Enron. Adani is not Madoff. Adani is not FTX. And these are all big scams that roiled the American economy and market for some time ago, right? Enron was smoke and mirrors. Those guys were just lying. Madoff was the biggest Ponzi scheme in history, right? I think it was like a $65 billion scheme where he was hoodwinking investors. And then FTX, this just happened, I don't know, a month ago or something, $40 billion, poof, gone like that, right under the nose of the very vigilant SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Department of Justice and so forth. So these things happen. But the other difference really is that if you compare those guys to Adani, exactly as you said, Adani has hard assets. Ports generate money, right? Airports generate money, and he's got all his mines and things like that. Whereas those people are involved in vaporware. So that was, and he's very good at doing projects. Now, that unfortunately is the one thing I think will be affected because, like there is Viridium Port, which is in my backyard, strategic container port. Now, that requires a lot of capital, upfront capital. He may find that his ability to raise debt capital is hurt because of this, so-called scandal. That's the only negative outcome I see at this point.
On the other hand, Rajiv, I really wonder if someone is planning to do to India what they have done to so many nations and their economies. I mean, look at Syria, look at Ukraine, Sri Lanka, Lebanon, Venezuela, most of Equatorial and North Africa. I mean, millions and millions of good, decent citizens have lost their entire lives, earnings, livelihoods, even their homes, have had to run away as penniless refugees wandering in hostile foreign lands with little hope. So Soros' statement to me is an ominous alarm bell that this may be coming to my neighborhood and yours unless we pay attention and take action. It's not something to ignore at all.
No, I agree with you. As I said earlier, he's a completely immoral person. He doesn't care about the broken countries, broken families, broken lives he leaves behind him. The only thing he's interested in is money. So he has to be taken seriously. You can't write him off, especially because, as I said, it's not just Soros, the individual. There is a nexus behind him of some very dark forces, right? So they and he have an intent on this whole thing about regime change. And you saw Victoria Nuland and Hillary Clinton showing up in India recently. And I think these are ominous, right? And plus, there have been all these other things, the Oxfam report, the BBC report. It's all bullshit. But, there is a consistent narrative being built up. Yeah, I agree with you. This is dangerous stuff for this country.
So how do you sense the government's and corporate India's reactions? I found it very interesting that really major Indian industrialists came out and they didn't say Adani is good, but
Yeah,
they said everything without saying those words and basically conveyed very strong support. I was really delighted to see that.
well, and also they put their money where their mouth is, right? As I mentioned earlier, there's
Right.
Indian billionaires who picked up his FPO. So what that suggests to me, and also with the government, I think they're not excited by this. They think this is something that can be handled because we have some competency here. Like I mentioned briefly about how we navigated our way through the post-COVID financial ups and downs, and also we've kept ourselves out of harm's way in various other things. We didn't jump into the Ukraine war, and in fact, we're doing rather well with that low-cost Russian oil, right? We import that oil and process it and turn it around. So I think without being excited, I think the Indian industry, captains of industry, and the Indian government have taken a wait and see. They're not ignoring this, but they're also not getting excited and running around and doing crazy things. So I think it's good. Moderation is good.
What do you see as lessons to protect steady growth in India and reduce vulnerabilities to such attacks? Or
Yeah,
at least deter such attacks?
Yeah, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, I see these not as isolated economic events. It's a regime change attack, so it has to be viewed in its totality. Okay, and you have to connect the dots. And we have, God willing, been doing quite well with the see, remember this fellow from the US named Duleep Singh, who came down here and basically yelled at India to say you gotta go the Ukraine way, whatever. Ignored him. Okay, so and nothing happened. In fact, his sanctions have basically been turned useless. So yeah, I think we need to be very clear that this is about the 2024 Indian elections. That's what it is. Which is interesting because there is an election in the US also in 2024. And I don't know if Soros is going to involve himself there as well. But yeah, vigilance, but not panic. I think that's the way we should be going forward.
So I want to get back to that uncanny similarity to the 2002 attack. The same simultaneous releases of the same baseless accusations. And it doesn't, as I think you remarked at that time, there's no point in reasoning with these people. They just keep repeating same nonsense. Choreographed media releases, talking heads, parroting exactly the same nonsense, gloating political crooks. It's all the same old stuff. It's a classic case of, what is that? Did you know his sibling is, I can't say what gender now, is a thespian.
Thespian, right.
Yes.
How awful.
Ominous. Right. So it depends on the assumption that most Indians don't read beyond headlines, don't think, and are easily manipulated by dramatic allegations, especially against anyone who works hard and is successful. But I'm going to tell you that these are equally doomed to laughter when sane people do pay attention, as is happening here already. Oh, by the way, 20 years after the Sabarang report, IDRF is doing very well. But that's not the point. Much more to the point. See, they were all against Hindus and Indians having any power at all. Community awareness and fundraising by the Hindu diaspora, especially, are perhaps 10 to 100 times what they were in 2002. So every time I see that, I give thanks to the Sabrang and all these people who made this possible with their generous time and effort and all this. Kids are taking care of, and they are taking pride in our culture. So these predators certainly had effect, but maybe not what they intended.
Well, apparently the law of unintended consequences strikes again.
Right.
Well, let's hope, Narayan, we should wind up here. Let's hope that the same thing is going to hold true of this Adani strike as well, and that in the end, it'll be a damn squib. and it be back to business as usual. But as you correctly pointed out, this is not something to be ignored. There are malign forces out there that are attacking the India story, which on average looks rather good right now. So on that note, thank you very much once again for coming on board and this lovely conversation, and let's catch up again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.